Good morning, everyone. Welcome to News Center Maine's Political Brew for this Independence Day, a special season finale of Political Brew before we take a summer break. Now, Phil Harriman and Ken Altshuler can't be with us today, but we are joined by longtime Democratic activist Betsy Sweet, Ray Richardson of WLOB Radio, former Democratic State Senator and Mayor of Portland Ethan Strimling, and a special guest analyst today, John Richardson Jr., son of our late friend and fellow political junkie, John Richardson. Welcome to you all. John, welcome to this very unusual gathering.
It's good to be here.
Just a couple things going on in politics this week. Let's get to it. It seems Paul LePage wants his old job back. He's registered as a candidate for governor with the Commission on Ethics and Elections, and he's teasing an announcement for tomorrow. We have not seen anything quite like this since 1990 when former Governor Joe Brennan tried to topple then Governor Jock McKernan. That was a fun race to cover. Betsy, we'll start with you. Handicap this race of Janet Mills versus Paul LePage for us.
Well, I think it's going to be really interesting to see what happens with this. I mean, I think it'll be a tight race. I think that the Paul LePage, that sort of angry, let's go after people kind of thing is sort of waning. And I think as the economic recovery takes place and as people do better and it comes back, I think people are going to say, that politics of blaming somebody else and narrowness and getting rid of government, I think that's starting to fade. So I think that we're right on the cusp. And so I think it's going to be a very tight race, but hopefully, and I'm not very optimistic, but hopefully they'll stay on the high ground and really talk about what matters to Maine people.
Look, if the race were held today, no doubt Janet would win, probably by 10 points. A recent poll that came out a month ago doing a head-to-head race had her up 45-38. That makes sense. She has some of her vetoes have really started to alienate her base, so she has to be pretty careful. She can't start losing people. She's behaving a little bit like a Republican. Maybe she's doing that to try to appeal to moderates, but I think it's really going to hurt her if she keeps doing that. So I think it is going to be very tight. Paul LePage has never lost a race, right? Let's remember that. He has never lost a race. And so I don't think he's getting in this without thinking he can truly win it. I think that Mills can win it, but she's really going to have to work hard to make sure that Democrats are united behind her and continue to sort of focus on the values that Maine people care about. I think Betsy's right. LePage is a little bit of yesterday, a little bit too angry, but it's worked for him for 30 years in Maine politics, so we'll see.
Before we get to Ray, Ethan, do you think there'll be a progressive primary challenger for Janet Mills?
I don't think so, not a serious one. I don't think, I do think that there may be on the other side of some, like an independent maybe getting in the race. Somebody might challenge LePage, but I don't think there'll be a progressive coming from the left on Mills.
Ray, what do you think of this race as it looks now?
Yeah, there was an interesting story this morning. Tom Saviello, who's been a Democrat, an independent, a Republican, and now an independent, has a website with a countdown clock, much like LePage's, for an announcement next week. So we'll see. Look, I like the governor. I know him quite well. I think in his time away from being governor, he's learned a lot. He's really laser-like focused on the issues. And, he doesn't need to do this. He's coming back because he believes we were in a moment when he left office where the state was really creating an environment where prosperity could happen. He thinks that moment has slipped away. He wants to come back and fix it. Let's face it, for all of us, the governor and the current governor, they're not the best of friends. So this is going to be an exciting race.
They're both tough competitors. John Richardson, what do you make of it?
Well, I think just like in 2016, you had to take Donald Trump seriously. And I think, Governor Mills has to take Governor LePage seriously here. And hopefully it stays a two-way race for her. I think she would do well there. It will be interesting to see if there's any strong challengers that enter the field as well.
All right, we had Governor Mills get to sign a bipartisan budget deal, pretty much a drama-free process when you get right down to it. She signed that a few days ago. Has a lot of things in it. It includes $300 so-called hazard pay bonus for about 500,000 people who worked during the pandemic. Now, that's far less than a Republican proposal for a tax break on $10,000 of income. But Ethan, do you think this is a good compromise?
Well, look, anything that gets more money in the pockets of working people in Maine is a good idea. $300 is not going to change the world, but there are a lot of folks out there for whom $300 matters. That said, look, if you really want to get money in the pockets of working class people, you got to bump up wages in this state. Let's get the minimum wage up to $15 an hour. Let's bump up the earned income tax credit. Let's try to find ways to really get money in the pockets of working people, and that'll be better. But I get it. In order to get Republican votes, they had to placate, and they did, and this will be fine.
What do you think of it, Ray?
Philosophically, I would have loved to have seen a real tax cut. I think Governor Mills had a historic opportunity here to buy the income tax down to 5% flat. It would have made a big deal in the state of Maine and frankly around the country for people looking at Maine. You may recall Governor Baldacci proposed a tax cut, and the Wall Street Journal called it the Maine miracle. He didn't even actually get it through, but just the idea of talking about a tax cut was a big deal. So a lot of Republicans don't like this idea, the $300. This is going to working people. In other words, you're giving working people back some of their money. We usually call that a tax cut. I'm okay with it.
What do you make of it, John?
To me, I think we've called a lot of people heroes that kind of worked through it and well-deserved. I can't think of a better gift and thank you than cash. So I think more cash now is a real psychological benefit to that than a little bit less or more back on your tax return later.
I think it's fine, but I think it's for the token of $300, and it means a lot to a lot of people, and I get that, and I think that's really important. But man, with that $150 million, we could have done investments that were going to pay off, not just in the week or 10 days it's going to take for someone to spend that money, but that would pay off long-term, investments in our community mental health system, investments in our local businesses. We don't need another tax cut. I think the Republicans were wrong to say that. LePage just gave the biggest tax cut that Maine has ever seen. And, that's not what's working now. What's working is investment. So I would have rather seen it go to some kind of investment, but I'm glad it went to working people instead of a tax cut for the 1%.
We had a red letter day this past week when the pandemic state of emergency finally ended after 15 months, and the Maine CDC held its last scheduled COVID-19 related briefing. Ray, we'll start with you. What kind of grades do you give to the people in charge of Maine's COVID pandemic response and how they did?
So I'm going to give them a C, and here's why. I don't think Maine was ever in the jeopardy that a lot of states were. The last pandemic we had, the H1N1 virus, while not as deadly, was more contagious. Dorian Mills was the head of the Maine CDC at the time. I gave her a lot of credit for going out and empowering people with information and then trusting them to do what was right. I don't believe her sister did that. I think Governor Mills mandated a lot of shutdowns. It's hurt a lot of people. I know we had deaths here, and that's a tragedy, but there are a lot of people that don't have something to come back to because of how Governor Mills handled this. So I'm going to give her a grade of C. Not a failing grade, but a grade of C.
John Richardson?
I would say Governor Mills and Dr. Shaw, I'd give them an A-. I mean, I don't think you could be perfect on these things. I think they led with science, and despite the pain that we were all feeling, there are people that are going to be at 4th of July parties this weekend that, for sure would not have been otherwise. And then I would take the legislature, particularly the Republican caucus, and I think, it wouldn't be unfair to give them an F because they sat on the sidelines instead of kind of partnering to ease the pain on businesses and families during this, the opportunity to meet. So I think when you're elected to govern, you got to govern. They didn't do it, so they get an F.
Betsy, how did Maine's leaders do on this?
Oh, I give them a solid A. In medicine and in health, prevention is a pound of prevention is a pound of cure. So, Ray, even though we weren't at the top of the list in terms of danger, the reason is because we were doing prevention, and she was doing the science. Both Dr. Shaw and the governor were doing science. They were keeping us from being ever on that edge. And had we been in the places of some other states, our tourism industry wouldn't be back this July 4th. We wouldn't be doing this. We would still be trying to crawl out of this. So I think they get high marks. I think Maine people get high marks for getting out there, getting vaccinated, being careful. And the stuff with school, it's really hard to know. And, the science is unknown for a lot of this, but I think they did an incredible job. I think Maine people rallied. And as John said earlier, I think the workers who helped us out are, people who we are indebted to forever.
And Ethan, Maine has demographically the oldest population in the country, so there were naturally a lot of fears at the beginning of the pandemic that we were going to see a lot more cases and a lot more deaths. The number, as bad as it was, more than 850 deaths, certainly could have been a lot larger, it seems.
Yeah, it certainly could have been. I mean, you got to give Janet Mills in this, an A- at the lowest in terms of how she's handled it. And I think when you look at the number of deaths and the number of infections and really trying to make sure that, businesses were taken care of, I think she's done a really good job. I think the CDC did a very good job, really good communication, which is one of the keys to all of this. You got to make sure people have the information they need. Some governors around the country were sort of hiding the ball a little bit or being deceptive, and she was not. I do think the one area that would have been better is to really try to get out hazard pay to people as they were going to jobs and making sure that they were getting the extra money. In the city of Portland, we passed something that gave essential workers $18 an hour as a minimum. It was very effective. A lot of businesses put it in place. It really helped out. That's the one area why I wouldn't give her an A+, but she's done a very good job.
Leaders of Maine's 4 Native American tribes were very disappointed that Governor Mills vetoed a bill that would have allowed them to open casinos and other gambling businesses on tribal land. The legislature was unable to override that veto. Now, the governor has talked a lot about improving relationships with the Wabanaki Nation and boosting tribal sovereignty. John Richardson, this doesn't sound like a step in that direction.
Well, I want to be fair to the governor, and I think there's a number of reasonable points that she raised in her veto. But I wouldn't be true to myself if I didn't say I was a little bit disappointed. Gambling is not a business that maybe I would target, but I think if the tribes feel that that's what's best for them, I think that it ought to be their decision. I think there's no doubt that this type of thing would have an impact on Maine, but certainly not as much as the first 2 casinos that we already have approved and sports betting that we're currently considering. So to me, to kind of avoid being paternalistic towards the tribes, I think there's a high bar in denying them a chance at economic development. And I think that some of the issues that were raised probably could be fixed.
Betsy, what do you think?
I think it's a big, big mistake. And again, this is not, to me, it's not about gaming. I'm sort of agnostic about the issue of gaming. The issue is really self-governance and sovereignty. And when she ran for governor and she ran in the primary, I'll tell you, I ran in that primary, and every single one of our 57 forums, the issue of tribal sovereignty got raised. And every single time she said, yes, I'm different, I've changed, because, she had not been great on it. And both with the land claims changes that were happening, that bill got carried over. It didn't get voted on this time, so it's not dead, but they didn't do anything. And then with this was really about sovereignty. And there are a lot of people, a lot of folks who believe that our tribes deserve that sovereignty, who are pissed off, and the tribes themselves. And, there hasn't been that open communication. There hasn't been that collaboration, which was promised. And so I think this is something she's going to have to fight back from.
And Ethan, I know you're concerned about the number of vetoes of some progressive priorities that the governor has signed.
Yeah, I think Betsy nailed this issue right on. I think on this one in particular, look, I'm not as surprised. I served on the board of Casinos No with Janet. She's been opposed to that forever. But when you aren't doing anything else to help, then it becomes very problematic. You can't sort of take your stand everywhere. But I'll tell you what, I alluded to it in our first segment. She has vetoed a tremendous number of Democratic priorities, and that is really alienating people. And it's problematic just from a governing perspective. I served under Baldacci, and let me tell you, this was never happening under Baldacci. He made clear to people ahead of time what he would sign. If there was something he didn't support, he would let them know, tell them what changes needed to occur. In this instance, stuff is going all the way through the legislature and getting to her desk, and legislators are surprised that she's vetoing these things, important priorities to Democrats. It's really going to undermine her reelection, and I think her sort of, political morale within the Democratic Party if she keeps doing this. It's really a problem.
Ray, what do you make of the tribal casino veto and, in general, all of the other vetoes of some Democratic priorities?
Well, first of all, let me say I agree with my buddy Ethan. I heard from some folks. I have some family members who are Native American, and they basically see it as she moved Columbus Day to Indigenous Peoples Day as a symbolic act, but when the rubber met the road, she vetoed the casinos. Now, I've long held that I think Maine has done this wrong. I really felt strongly we should have had a statewide referendum. Do you want casinos or do you not? And then determine how many we want, and then let a competitive bid process take place. We could have gotten a lot of money for those licenses. So I think we've done it wrong all along. I was surprised, frankly, she vetoed this bill, and I think there is going to be some backlash for her.
All right, let's shift gears. As we say, this is the final installment of Political Brew before the summer break and before we come back in September. So I want to ask each of you, we'll start with Betsy, what has been the biggest political story of 2021 so far?
Okay, well, I'm going to let these guys talk about the January 6th insurrection and about COVID, because I think a very subtle thing that has happened, and it relates to the last issue. But I think what happened, and it wasn't highly successful this time, but in the legislature, talking about the opioid crisis and talking about criminal justice reform, I felt for the first time in 40 years a shift from looking at like the opioid crisis as a criminal issue to understanding it as a public health issue. When we look at incarceration and seeing how it's so racially biased and how it doesn't work, and it's so much money for the taxpayers, it's just a lose, lose, lose all the way around. And, people, usually one or two people say that and then they just get ignored. This time, I mean, again, it didn't go over the finish line, but there was a huge shift in how people started to understand or re-understand or look at that through a different lens. And I think that's going to be a really profound thing moving forward.
Ethan, what do you think?
Well, I hope Betsy's right on that one. That is something that needs a new focus for sure. Yeah, look, Betsy's right. Look, January 6th, these issues, COVID, clearly huge issues. I'd say in Maine, Paul LePage getting back in the race is the biggest sort of quote unquote political story. Although I would say nationally, the thing that I think actually is going to play out by the end of the year is filibuster reform. I think this issue is really starting to get under people's skin. I think that people are recognizing the U.S. Senate is absolutely dysfunctional. Time and again, policies the people of this country want passed, policies that Democrats are pushing for, who represent a huge majority of the American people, tens of millions more than Republicans do, and they're not getting it through. I think the filibuster is going to be the issue of 2021, and by the end of the year, I actually think there will be reforms.
Ray Richardson, what's the biggest story so far this year in politics?
I'm going to disagree with Ethan on that one, only because Joe Manchin has been so clear that he won't vote for it, and there's no Republican that would allow it to happen. So I don't see.
Well, keep pushing Joe Manchin the way you guys are. I think pretty soon that he's going to stand up and say this is absurd.
Well, we'll see. He's been pretty clear in the Wall Street Journal and in the Charleston News. I think in Maine, politically, I agree with Ethan. Paul LePage actually getting into the race is the biggest political story for 2022. Nationally, I go back to January 6th. That was a shocking moment, I think, for the country. It certainly was for me. I hope that an independent body will actually investigate this. I know Nancy Pelosi is putting together a coalition of Trump haters, frankly. We need people who will get to truth, not a partisan outcome. So I think nationally, January 6th was the biggest story.
John Richardson, what do you think?
I think to me, it's a trend. It's kind of the return to normalcy. We started the year with a raid on the Capitol, but today we got competent leadership. COVID cases are going down. People are excited to get together with family and friends for July 4th. To me, that all-consuming political news cycle, and kind of, a lot of folks worrying about how to make ends meet. There's still work to be done there, but there's kind of a collective sigh of relief that's starting, and then we can focus on some of these really important issues that haven't had good focus in terms of policy, like Betsy raised with opioids and criminal justice reform.
And I want each of you to give me a political prediction for the second half of 2021. Ethan, we'll start with you.
I think you asked me earlier if a Democrat was going to challenge Mills. I don't think that that's going to happen, but I do think there is going to be a significant third party that is going to get into this race before the year ends.
All right. Ray Richardson, what do you think?
I think the biggest thing you're going to see is a different Paul LePage. I think this is a guy who has gained a lot of perspective, having been stepped away from the governor's office for 2.5 years. It's allowed him to reflect on what he did really well and what he did very poorly. And I think you're going to see a Paul LePage emerge in this race that a lot of people in the state of Maine are going to be surprised by, and they're going to be pleasantly surprised by it.
John Richardson.
A leopard don't change its spots there, Ray. You guys kept saying there was going to be a new Donald Trump, too, and that never happened either. So.
John, weigh in on this. Give us a prediction for the next half of the year.
Well, I think there's a lot to look forward to in terms of the infrastructure bill and what that could mean for Maine, voting rights nationally, filibuster, of course. But I think, unfortunately, and not to be a Cassandra, I think we have to still keep an eye on COVID. When you look at states that have very low vaccination rates and the Delta variant and the potential for new variants that might impact, already vaccinated Mainers and folks that are doing the right thing here. That's something I think we're going to have to keep an eye on. We've got very strong leadership on this point between Dr. Shaw and the governor. And so I'm hopeful for the future on this one.
And Betsy Sweet.
Well, Ethan stole mine, but I actually think there might be two independents that get in this race, two unenrolled folks in this race, maybe one from each side, So I think we're going to see that. But, I think the other thing that's going to be, and again, I'll go back to my first half. I think that there is a shift that we're seeing that with the infrastructure bill, with positive investment, of people actually starting to change away from government as the bad guy, which Ronald Reagan started, to actually government as a way to actually help us do investments, help us meet the needs of everyday working people. And I think that's going to be a shift. The other thing I think is going to be how government help people forming community. I think people are hungry for community. They're hungry for connection, partly because we realized what happened after COVID, during COVID. But I think that shift and that government and investment and public investment isn't the boogeyman, isn't the terrible thing that it is. I think we're going to see that, and that's going to get stronger and stronger as we go, which will affect the election.
All right. Ordinarily, we wrap up with asking our analysts for winners and losers in politics of the week. I'm going to preempt that today and take that unto myself and only choose a winner in politics, Mal Leary. The Dean of State House Reporters retired on Friday after covering Maine politics for 45 years. Mal is a straight shooter. Nobody knows the State House and the people under the dome better. And he was also always available to educate very green reporters about the workings of the legislature. So we offer congratulations and a happy retirement to Mal Leary. I know you all echo that too.
Yeah, absolutely.
He was really good at asking very hard questions of very green legislators who would come in. He didn't give you a break on your first day.
We all learned something from Mal.
Yeah.
That's great. That's going to do it for Political Brew. We'll be back with our segments in September. Everyone have a great summer. News Center Maine is back after this.